Welcome to Aether United Interviews, where we have interviews with people within the blockchain as well as various esports. I'm your host, Brian Chang, and today we're joined by Patrick Barron. Patrick is a blockchain instructor at Fintech school and is the head of business development at Amibisafe, which specializes in the issuance of Ethereum-based financial instruments and related services such as ICOs and exchange integrations. Previously, he was a co-founder of Hitfin, an Ethereum-based platform that moves traditional financial assets onto the blockchain. He is a consultancy advisor to Blockchain at Berkeley, which is UC Berkeley's student-led organization with over 200 members that train blockchain engineers and consultants, as well as provides consulting services to Fortune 500 companies. We called him in today to help explain the intricacies of blockchain to the viewers here at Aether United. So, hello, Patrick. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing excellent. How are you?
Sounds good. I'm doing fine as well. Just finishing up school, finals rolling around.
Well done.
Yeah, so blockchain is an intimidating term, and we called you in today to discuss to allow you to give us a brief education on the importance of this new technology and to allow our viewers to be more comfortable in using this technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. And so moving on to our questions. How would you explain blockchain to someone who has never heard of the term before?
Yeah, so a blockchain, I will give you the more technical definition, and then I'll break it down into pieces because I think that's the best way to go about it. So a blockchain is a distributed database protocol, and it uses cryptography as well as a consensus algorithm to maintain a perpetually growing ledger of transactions.
Right.
And so to break that down into smaller bits and pieces, first off, you can kind of think of it as like a Google Doc, and everybody can see the entries of a Google Doc as if it's being shared across a team. So the ledger, and I'm specifically talking about the Bitcoin blockchain.
Right.
There's a number of different blockchains out there, but we'll focus in on that one because it was the first, and its underlying technology is used in just about every other blockchain. So if you understand it, then you're going to be able to understand the technology. But it's a distributed database. So the database is similar to the databases that we're used to that store all of our pictures and text files and these types of things, except that anybody has the ability to download an entire copy of the database.
Right.
So it's open, it's borderless, it's permissionless, and it uses public and private key cryptography in order to verify ownership of digital assets. And the consensus algorithm is a voting mechanism that the entire set of nodes use to come to agreement on who owns what. So it's a database. It's a database that's distributed across the world. Anybody can become a member of it. It's a protocol, so it's a communication method, and it uses cryptography to protect the information and to enable the transfer of the information by the rightful owners. And the consensus algorithm is what it uses to determine who owns what. So that's the voting mechanism. So at a very high level, that is what a blockchain is.
I see. All right. Thank you. And with your, cryptography and everything, blockchain is often praised for its transparency, like you said, borderless, etc., and its safety. How do they achieve this?
Yeah, exactly right. So the way that the Bitcoin blockchain achieves its ability to come to consensus is that everybody can see every single transaction since the very beginning. So you can think of the Bitcoin blockchain as being pseudonymous. So it's partially anonymous. What I mean by that is that everybody can see every single transaction.
Right.
Now, it may or may not be possible to correlate a particular address that a transaction came from or went to with a real world identity. So that's why it's pseudonymous. And because it uses the strongest cryptography available to secure the transactions, is almost computationally impossible for somebody to guess a private key based on the knowledge of the public key. So what that means is that if you control the private key to a wallet, to an address that has Bitcoin in it, it is your Bitcoin. You, by the laws of this protocol, you own those Bitcoin because you control it. The other piece is that the consensus algorithm is like, you can think of it as similar to pouring layers of concrete. So when a transaction goes through and the miners verify, the miners are the group of nodes on the network that are looking at the transactions and coming to agreement in consensus, using the consensus algorithm to come to agreement.
Right.
Every time they come to agreement, they add a new set of transactions onto the previous set of transactions, and they lock it mathematically. So what that means is that as a transaction gets further and further down, and that's called adding another block. That's where we get the blockchain,
right?
The block of transactions. And so if we take a transaction and it gets verified by the miners and it gets put into that block, and then another block gets put in on top of it, and then another one, what it's doing is that if you wanted to be a bad actor, you wanted to say undo this transaction that was 3 blocks ago, not only do you have to undo that block and redo all of the work that was associated with coming to the answer to that block, but you also have to do the next 2 blocks as well. And you have to do it faster than the rest of the network. So as a transaction gets verified, you can think of that as like pouring 1 layer of concrete, and then the next block, and then the next, and then the next layer, and then the next layer, and then the next layer. So it becomes exponentially more difficult to undo a transaction, and you would have to expend a tremendous amount of computing resources and electricity in order to accomplish that. Now, this is where the game theory piece comes in. Satoshi Nakamoto, who published the Bitcoin white paper, was a brilliant game theorist. And what Satoshi realized is that if you're going to expend all of those resources undoing a transaction so that you can defraud the system and cheat somebody out of Bitcoin that you sent them, you actually have an incentive to point those computing resources towards securing the network and being rewarded for doing so.
Right, because you would gain more Bitcoin in the process rather than losing or trying to gain back the Bitcoin that you used.
Right. In order to defraud the system, you have to expend computing resources and electricity. You can expend those exact same computing resources and electricity towards securing the network, and you can also earn Bitcoin. So it's there's an incentive in there for people to secure the network. So that's the cryptography is part of why it's so secure. The game theory aspect of how it all works together is the other reason why it's secure.
And that also provides the safety net for people who want to make transactions between in blockchain.
Right, exactly right. So that's the mechanism that's used to verify that somebody. So in order to, if I were going to send you 1 Bitcoin, what I would do is that I would initiate the transaction, and what the miners are going to do is going to look and see if I have access to 1 Bitcoin. If I have 1 unspent transaction, that's all it is unspent transactions. The way they're going to verify that is that they're going to look back and see if there's a record of somebody sending that of Bitcoin to me, and they will trace that all the way back to the genesis of that particular Bitcoin.
Right.
And I'll go ahead and hit on that. The way that Bitcoin is created and introduced into the system is by the process of mining. So as the miners verify the transactions, they look to see where all the Bitcoin went for that set of transactions. And then they're also doing computation. They're looking for a particular number. It's a random number. It's like a lottery. And so all they're doing is that they're just trying random numbers over and over and over again until they find one that solves the math problem for that particular block. If they're the first ones to solve that math problem and they mine that block, then they get what's called a coin base. That's a special reward that they put into the transaction block, which is brand new Bitcoin that have never been, they've never existed before.
That's the first block.
So that is every single block. Every single block that gets created, there's new Bitcoin that's introduced into the system. We know exactly how many Bitcoins it is. There's a set monetary policy. Originally, it was, I believe it was either 50 or 100 originally, and then it halved again. And now we're at 12 and a half Bitcoin per block. And then in about 4.5 years approximately, it's going to halve again until we get all the way until all 21 million Bitcoin are released. And that'll be somewhere within the year of 2140.
Something to look forward to.
Something to look forward to.
All right. And I'd be interested in knowing what are some of the new uses for this technology besides creating cryptocurrencies like blockchain and Ethereum?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's amazing about this technology is that we have the ability to assign value to these assets that are being created. So you can take this digital asset, a Bitcoin, or in the case of the Ethereum blockchain, their native currency is called Aether, and you can assign value to it, right? So this value could be equivalent to the deed of a house, and the Bitcoin could have an address that points to a file where you can see the actual deed, the PDF file of the deed. Another area that we're seeing a lot of use cases popping up is in supply chain management. So there's a lot of use cases where a company needs to keep track of where particular products are, who's touched them, and who's owned them. And in this case, you have an immutable ledger. Immutable means that it can't be undone. The immutability is a factor of the consensus algorithm. So saying that it can't be undone is not exact. It's 99% true. It can only be undone if all of the miners decide to undo it. But for the sake of our conversation, it is immutable. It's much more, and it's also trustless. So if, like, let's say, for example, you want to find out whether or not your spinach is organic or not, you could theoretically scan the barcode on the bag of spinach, and then you could reference the blockchain, assuming that the suppliers along the blockchain were using this app, and then you could see who's touched it, which farm it came from, whether it was imported, and whether or not that farm actually has been certified organic. There's endless numbers of possibilities in supply chain. Other areas of innovation that we're seeing include in the health sector. So things like securing your health records, being able to secure your genomic identity. It really gives you, because of the public-private key cryptography that's used, we have the ability to control our privacy, control information about us. And really, anywhere that there is a middleman who is facilitating some type of service, if it's a digital service, there's a good chance that a blockchain, a decentralized distributed ledger like the blockchain, has the ability to disintermediate them. The area that I work at, Amibisafe, is we're using this technology for capital raising. So you can think of it as a mix between Kickstarter and venture capital, where entrepreneurs have the ability to issue tokens that can be used on their platform and sell them to users worldwide. So you can essentially pre-sell your product, and assuming that the platform takes off and there's utility of the platform and people enjoy using it, the value of those tokens are going to increase. So it's a brand new mechanism for fundraising that we've never seen before, and we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars flow into this area just this year alone. So lots of use cases, and the most interesting use cases we haven't even thought of yet. We haven't even seen them yet. But this ecosystem is developing, and you're seeing tools to support the ecosystem, which then lead to new possibilities and new ideas. And it's a really exciting time to be in this space.
And so your answer basically leads us into question 4 about the decentralization and crowd governance, and how it transforms the economy and our life in general, right? Because we can track all the records back to if we want to check if that spinach is organic, or if we want to check our genetic code, etc. So good stuff in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you mentioned governance. And so there's also going to be a lot of applications within the government sector. So being able to track where tax dollars are being spent, being able to cast a vote electronically and know with 100% certainty that your vote was counted the way
and
that
not
you cast it.
swapped.
and not
Someone
swapped.
else's vote.
Exactly right. You can also we have the ability to check and see how all of the votes were counted. Now that doesn't mean that you can necessarily see who cast a particular vote, with the
Right.
exception of your own, but you do have the ability to check and verify that what the official count is what is being presented
Is
on
the
the
same
blockchain.
with the blockchain.
Right, exactly right. You can also use this for corporate governance, for like proxy voting and these types of things. But this really does give an avenue for electronic voting that hasn't existed with this level of security and sophistication. It's never existed like this before.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. And so for Aether United, we're focusing on bridging the gap between blockchain and esports and finding a way to mesh the two together. Do you see any interesting intersections and synergies now or in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely an area where blockchain can really thrive and provide some interesting new opportunities. So the ability for fans to directly interact with a team and make decisions through the voting mechanisms that I was just talking about, being able to really engage at a level that it just wasn't possible before. There was no real mechanism for for enabling this type of user engagement. So what we're going to see is that we're going to see user engagement in esports. We're going to see user engagement across traditional NFL,
Right.
NBA, Major League Baseball. There's no reason that the Golden State Warriors can't have golden coin, and it's redeemable at the stadium for drinks, or you can you can, if you hold the gold coin, then you can vote on players, and
Right.
so, and this type of thing, this works in esports, this works in traditional sports. You also have the ability to wager on sports, right? That's also a possibility that could be done before, but it's made much easier in this type of thing. So you can bring in like prediction markets.
Right.
This is an area that we've seen a lot of innovation in blockchain, is the ability to pose a question, and then people can vote with real money, whether or not they think
the
that,
answer.
right. And then harnessing the wisdom of the crowds. And because people put money on it, you would think that it's going to, the theory is that it'll give you more accurate answers.
Mhm.
But the user engagement is the one that I would say is the most exciting,
Right.
and is the greatest. It's going to be pretty cool to be a part of.
Yeah, great. And so for the blockchain community and ecosystem, what do you think, or what are you most excited for in the coming years, decades, etc.?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's two things that I'm most excited for. The first of which is the ability to take back control of your personal privacy, your identity, your data. Moving into a decentralized world like we are rapidly going towards, it gives us new tools to enjoy the same types of platforms that we've had in the past, including Facebook and Twitter and Uber and all of these wonderful value-adding platforms that we have, except that we've had to it's a Faustian bargain. We've had to give them our privacy, give them our data and our information in order to use the platform. In a decentralized model where you have a token that manages all of this, and that token represents the value, and that token is the fuel that runs it, it changes the dynamic, and it gives us, the users, control again over our information and our data, and we can selectively decide what it is that we want to share with advertisers or third parties. And so that's the first thing that I'm really excited for. The second one is that there are 3.5 billion people in this world who are unbanked or underbanked. 3.5 is probably a conservative number. And this is because people either don't have access to traditional financial systems, because they either don't have enough money, so they're not profitable enough to be served, or they're considered high risk, or they don't have government issued ID. What this technology enables, because it is open, permissionless, borderless, means that anybody in the world has the ability to access the same level of financial instruments that we in the first world enjoy. And we are going to see a level of poverty reduction unlike anything that we have seen in our lifetime. And so for me, seeing how this technology, it has the ability and is starting to positively impact the lives of billions of the people around the world is really motivating. It gives me a purpose for being a part of it, because once people have financial security and they have financial inclusion, then they have an ability to truly discover themselves and contribute to the world as a whole. And when we have an environment like that, it sets the stage for a much more peaceful existence. If people have good options, if they have good jobs, if they have the access to capital, then we're going to see a decrease in violence. We're going to see a decrease in poverty. We're going to see a decrease in extremism, because there's a better way. And so for me, it's all about the 3.5 billion who've been excluded from our existing financial infrastructure and who now have an ability to join this wonderful world of financial inclusion that we have and fulfill their lives and fulfill their purpose. So that's what I'm excited about.
Right. Well, thank you. That was definitely a very in-depth guide on what blockchain is. And we appreciate, thank you for having you with us. And to all of our viewers out there, if you want to check out Patrick's social media, places he works at, they'll be in the description down below, as well as Aether United. We'll also put our description, our Discord, our Facebook, etc. And well, yeah, that's basically it. Patrick, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.